If you walk out of that door, you will no longer be my daughter.
Then I won't be your daughter, Daddy. Patience, please. Listen to your father.
Listen to her.
I've made my choice, Mommy.
Then go. And don't ever come back.
Pastor Joseph Bankole's voice shook the walls of the small sitting room. His eyes were red with anger. His finger pointed straight at his only daughter, who stood by the door with a suitcase already in her hand. The door closed behind her, and just like that, Patience Bankole's old life ended. Outside, in the dark, a young man named Daniel was waiting quietly by the gate, his hands in his pockets, careful not to be seen. He had begged her not to make this choice for his sake, but Patience had already made up her mind long before that night. To understand how big this moment was, one had to understand who the Bankoles were. Pastor Joseph Bankole was the founder of Liberty Chapel, the largest church in the whole town. People traveled from neighboring villages just to hear him preach on Sunday mornings. His name was respected everywhere, at the market, at the council office, even among other pastors who admired how strict and disciplined he was with his only daughter. Patience had grown up knowing exactly what was expected of her: good grades, modest clothes, polite manners, and one day, marriage to a respectable young man chosen with her father's blessing. In fact, Pastor Bankole already had someone in mind, Emmanuel Adeyemi, the well-mannered son of his close friend, Elder Adeyemi. Emmanuel was studying to become an accountant, always wore ironed shirts, and greeted Pastor Bankole with both hands whenever they met. That boy will make a fine husband for Patience. Pastor Bankole often said at home, not as a suggestion, but as a plan already decided. Patience respected Emmanuel as a person, but there was no spark, no excitement, nothing that made her heart skip. She smiled politely whenever he visited, and counted the minutes until he left. Then Daniel happened, and everything her father had planned began to fall apart, quietly, like sand slipping through fingers. Daniel was 23 years old, tall, with rough hands and a scar above his left eyebrow from a fight he never talked about. He lived in the poorer part of the neighborhood called Mile 2, where boys grew up fast and trouble found them easily. People called him Danjo on the streets, and his name was attached to stories of fights, motor park gangs, and trouble with the police. But there was something the neighborhood did not know about Daniel. Every Sunday morning, before anyone in Mile 2 was awake, Daniel would quietly help old women in his area carry their water and firewood. He never told anyone. He simply believed that good deeds did not need an audience. One rainy afternoon, Patience's car broke down outside the church compound. She stood under her umbrella worried because her father's important guests were arriving in an hour, and she had promised to pick up decorations for the event. Daniel, who was repairing a neighbor's generator nearby, walked over without being asked and fixed her car in 15 minutes. "You don't have to thank me," he said, wiping his hands on a rag, just doing what anybody should do. Patience thanked him anyway, and from that small moment, something began to grow. She began visiting her best friend Esther, who happened to live on the same street as Daniel, more often than usual. Esther, sharp-eyed and always smiling, figured out the secret quickly. "You like the mechanic boy," Esther teased one evening, watching Patience peep through the curtain whenever Daniel passed by outside. "I do not," Patience said, blushing so hard that Esther only laughed harder. But it was true, and soon Esther became their secret helper, allowing her house to be the meeting place where Patience and Daniel could talk freely, away from watching eyes. They met behind the school field, at the market on busy afternoons when nobody would notice two more faces in the crowd, and sometimes only for 5 minutes near the river before Patience had to rush home for evening prayers. Patience discovered that Daniel was not the boy the rumors described. He had dropped out of school because his father died, and someone had to work to feed his 3 younger siblings, 2 sisters and a small brother who still called him Papa Daniel by mistake sometimes. He fixed engines, sold phone cards, did anything that brought in honest money. He was rough on the outside but patient and kind underneath, like a coconut, hard shell, soft inside. One evening, they were almost caught. Pastor Bankole's church driver spotted Patience laughing with a young man near the market stalls and almost recognized Daniel's face. Patience's heart pounded so loudly she was sure the driver could hear it, but Esther quickly distracted him with questions about church transport, giving the couple just enough time to slip away unseen. It was a warning neither of them took seriously enough. Because love, like smoke, cannot hide forever. A few weeks later, a church member named Deaconess Florence, known for seeing everything and forgetting nothing, saw Patience and Daniel sitting together near the river, hands joined, laughing softly under a mango tree. She did not say a word to them. She simply turned around and walked straight to Pastor Bankole's house. That was the day everything fell apart. After Patience walked out of her father's house, she had nowhere to go but to Daniel. He took her to a single room he rented in Mile 2, small, with one window, a worn mattress on the floor, and a kerosene stove in the corner. It was nothing like the big house she grew up in, with marble floors and a generator that never failed. "I know it's not much," Daniel said, embarrassed. "But it's all I have. It's enough," Patience said, even though her voice trembled. Life was hard, very hard. Patience, who had never fetched her own water before, now woke up before sunrise to queue at the public borehole. She sold sachet water by the roadside to support the little money Daniel made from fixing vehicles. Some nights, they ate only gari and sugar just to survive. Her soft hands grew calloused, and her once effing bright dresses faded from too much washing in cold water. People from her old church saw her hawking in the market and whispered behind her back, "That's the pastor's daughter," they said, shaking their heads. "See what shame she has brought to her family." Patience cried many nights, missing her mother's cooking, missing the comfort of her old home, missing church on Sundays. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered her father's voice, cold, final, unforgiving, and she stayed where she was. Daniel's younger siblings, Grace, Faith, and little Chidi, grew to love Patience quickly. She taught Grace and Faith their school letters in the evenings by lantern light, and little Chidi followed her everywhere, calling her Auntie Patty, until she laughed and said he could just call her sister. "You didn't have to do all this," Daniel told her one night, watching her help Chidi with his homework. "You could have had an easier life." "I didn't choose the easy life," Patience replied. "I chose you, there's a difference." But that easy life almost called her back one frightening week when little Chidi, Daniel's brother, came down with a high fever that would not break. Patience sat beside him through the night, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, while Daniel ran from one chemist to another, searching for medicine they could barely afford. By morning, with the boy still burning hot and weak, Patience swallowed her pride and sent word to her mother through Esther, asking, for the first time since she left home, for help. Comfort came at once, with money hidden inside her wrapper, and a small bag of drugs from the pharmacy near the church. She held the little Chidi in her arms with pity while the doctor examined him, and stayed long enough to see his fever finally break just before sunset. "Thank you, Mommy," Patience whispered, clinging to her mother at the doorway as she prepared to leave before her husband noticed how long she had been away. "Don't thank me," Comfort said, wiping her eyes quickly, "Just take care of yourself. And of him." She glanced toward Daniel, who was carrying water in from the well, and for the first time, something like respect flickered across her face. It was a small, quiet moment, but it planted a seed, one that would not bloom into anything more for a long time, but that neither woman would ever forget. What Patience did not know was that Daniel had a secret, and it was about to change everything. For 3 years, Daniel had been quietly saving money, little by little, inside an old Bonvita tin hidden under a floorboard. He was not just a mechanic fixing cars for survival. He had a dream to open his own proper workshop, the biggest and most trusted one in the area, so that no young man would ever have to live the way he had lived, with no skill and no future, easily pulled into gangs and trouble. He had told no one about this dream, not even Patience, because in Mao too, dreams were often laughed at before they could grow. One evening, a man named Chief Obika, the most feared loan shark and gang leader in Mao too, came looking for Daniel. Danjo. Chief Obika said, smiling in a way that was not friendly at all, "You used to run with us, you owe us loyalty. There's a job tonight, easy money. Just watch the road while we move some goods." Everyone in the area knew moving goods. For Chief Obika meant something illegal. Stolen car parts, sometimes worse. The old Daniel might have said yes without thinking twice. But the new Daniel, the one trying to build a future, with Patience, looked Chief Obika straight in the eye. "I'm done with that life," Daniel said. "Find someone else." Chief Obika's smile disappeared. "You regret this, Danjo. Nobody walks away from me." That night, Patience heard Daniel praying quietly, secretly, for the first time since she had known him. She realized then that the boy her father called a bad influence was fighting harder battles than she ever knew. What neither of them realized was that someone else had also been watching Daniel closely, someone with a very different reason to want him gone. Back at Liberty Chapel, Emmanuel Adeyemi had not taken Patience's disappearance lightly. He had truly hoped to marry her one day, and losing her to a common mechanic from Mile 2, as he called Daniel with disgust, wounded his pride deeply. Emmanuel began visiting Mile 2 secretly, asking questions, until one day he found himself face to face with Chief Obika in a dim corner shop. "I hear Danjo turned down your job," Emmanuel said carefully, sliding a folded bundle of Naira notes across the table. "Maybe you and I want the same thing, for him to disappear from this town." Chief Obika counted the money slowly, then smiled his cold smile. "I don't care why you want it. I only care that I'm paid. It was a quiet, dangerous agreement made in the shadows, and it would soon explode into fire." 2 days later, disaster struck. Daniel's small workshop, a wooden shed where he fixed cars by the roadside, caught fire in the middle of the night. Everything burned. His tools, his half-finished projects, even the old Bonvita tin with 3 years of his savings. People whispered that Chief Obika's boys had set the fire as revenge. No one could prove it, but everyone believed it. What no one suspected, not even Patience, was the well-dressed accountant's son who had quietly paid for the matches to be struck. Daniel stood in front of the smoking ashes the next morning, his whole future turned to smoke. For the first time, Patience saw him cry. "Maybe your father was right," Daniel said bitterly. "Maybe I really am nothing but trouble. I should let you go back home where you belong." "No," Patience said firmly, holding his face in her hands. "We will start again." Together, it was the lowest point of their lives, and yet it was also the turning point. Slowly, with help from kind neighbors who remembered all the quiet favors Daniel had done for them over the years, Fixing a generator here, repairing a roof there, free of charge, the little workshop began to rise again from the ashes, plank by plank, tool by borrowed tool. While Patience and Daniel struggled in mile 2, things were not peaceful in the Bankole household either. Pastor Bankole continued preaching every Sunday about forgiveness and God's love, but at home, he refused to forgive his own daughter. His wife, Comfort, secretly visited Patience whenever she could, bringing food, money, and news, but always begging her husband's name not be mentioned. "Have you heard anything from her?" Pastor Bankole asked one night, trying to sound uninterested though his eyes betrayed him. "She is surviving Joseph," Comfort answered carefully. "She and Daniel are working hard. He treats her well." Pastor Bankole said nothing, but that night, for the first time in months, he could not sleep. He had also begun to notice something strange about Emmanuel, who visited often now, asking too eagerly about Patience's whereabouts, always with a strange gleam in his eye that Pastor Bankole could not quite name, but which made him uneasy all the same. Then one Saturday, something happened that shook the whole town and gave Pastor Bankole a reason he could never have expected to think differently about the boy he had cursed. It was a hot Saturday afternoon when a commercial bus, overloaded and speeding, lost control on the road near the market and crashed into a fruit stand. Several people were trapped and injured, including, by terrible coincidence, Pastor Bankole himself, who had been walking back from visiting a sick church member. Smoke began to rise from the wreckage. People screamed and ran, afraid the vehicle would explode, too frightened to go near it. Daniel, who had been repairing a car nearby, having rebuilt his workshop slowly over the past year, with help from kind neighbors and Patience's careful savings, heard the crash and ran toward the danger, while everyone else ran away. He pulled 2 children from the wreckage first, then an old woman. Then, climbing through broken glass with his bare hands, he found Pastor Bankole, trapped and bleeding, his leg pinned beneath a twisted metal seat. "Hold on, sir," Daniel said, not even recognizing at first who it was in the smoke and confusion. "I've got you." With strength built from years of hard labor, Daniel pried the metal back and pulled the pastor free just moments before the fuel tank caught fire completely. They had barely cleared the wreck when a loud bang shook the ground behind them, and flames swallowed what remained of the bus. It was only outside, in the daylight, gasping for breath, that Pastor Bankole looked up at the face of the man who had just saved his life and recognized him. "Daniel," he whispered, stunned. "Pastor Bankole," Daniel said quietly, equally shocked. "Sir, are you all right?" For a long moment, neither man said anything. The whole town gathered around, watching the unbelievable scene. The boy that the pastor had cursed out of his house had just pulled him from a burning wreck with his own 2 hands. In the crowd, Emmanuel watched too, his face pale, saying nothing at all. Pastor Bankole was taken to the hospital with a broken leg, but he would live. As he recovered, he could not stop thinking about what had happened. He had spent 2 years believing Daniel Okafor was nothing but trouble, a curse on his daughter's future. Yet this same trouble had run into fire to save him, a man who had thrown him and his daughter away without mercy. Word of the rescue traveled fast, as such stories always do in a small town. It reached the ears of one of Chief Obika's younger boys, who, frightened that the fire incident might now be investigated more closely because of all the sudden attention on Daniel, confessed everything to a local police officer, including the name of the well-dressed young man who had paid for it all. When the officer arrived at Elder Adeyemi's house to question Emmanuel, the whole street gathered to watch in shocked silence as the once respected accountant's son was led away for questioning, his iron shirt suddenly looking very small on him. News of Emmanuel's betrayal reached Pastor Bankole in his hospital bed the very same day. The man he had once called a fine husband for Patience was the same man who had paid criminals to destroy Daniel's life out of jealousy and pride. Pastor Bankole closed his eyes and finally understood the truth he had been too proud to see. He had judged a man by where he came from, while ignoring the rot hidden behind a clean shirt and polite manners. One afternoon, as Pastor Bankole sat by his hospital window, his wife brought him slowly toward the truth he had been avoiding. "Joseph," Comfort said gently, "Patience did not run away to shame you. She ran away because you left her no other choice. And the boy you called worthless just saved your life, while the boy you wanted for her tried to destroy him. Maybe it's time to ask yourself who really has been wrong all this time." Pastor Bankole was silent for a long time. Then, slowly, tears filled his eyes, something the church had never seen from their strong, strict pastor. "Bring her to me," he said at last, his voice breaking. "Please, bring my daughter home." When Patience walked into the hospital room and saw her father lying there, thinner and humbled, she froze at the door, afraid of what he might say. But Pastor Bankole reached out his hand toward her. "I was wrong, my daughter," he said, weeping openly now. "I judged a man by where he came from instead of who he became. Can you forgive your foolish father?" Patience ran to his side, and they held each other and cried, 2 years of pain melting away in that one embrace. Daniel stood quietly by the door, unsure if he was welcome. Pastor Bankole looked at him over his daughter's shoulder. "Daniel," he said, "come here, my son." Daniel walked forward slowly. The pastor took his hand, the same rough hand that had carried him through fire. "You saved my life," Pastor Bankole said, "but more than that, you proved me wrong about everything I believed. I'm sorry." "There's nothing to be sorry for, sir," Daniel said, his eyes wet. "I just did what anybody should do." It was the very same thing he had said the day he fixed Patience's car, years ago. The pastor remembered, and for the first time, he understood what his daughter had seen in this young man all along. Months later, Daniel's workshop, now rebuilt bigger and stronger, with help and blessing from Pastor Bankole himself, had become one of the most trusted in the whole area. Young boys from Mautu, who once roamed the streets without direction, now worked there, learning a trade instead of falling into Chief Obika's troubles, just as Daniel once had. Grace and Faith, Daniel's sisters, were enrolled back in school, with Pastor Bankole quietly paying their fees, never mentioning it to anyone, simply leaving a little extra in Comfort's hand whenever she visited. Little Chidi, now taller and louder, had taken to calling the pastor Papa, which made the old man's chest swell with a joy he never expected to feel again. Chief Obika, shaken by how quickly his secret dealings with Emmanuel had unraveled and brought police attention to his corner of Mile 2, quietly packed up and disappeared from the area altogether, never to trouble Daniel again. Emmanuel, disgraced and facing serious questions from the police, moved away from the town in shame, his family's reputation never quite the same again. On a bright Sunday morning, the whole church gathered, not for an ordinary service, but for a wedding. Patience walked down the aisle in a white gown, and waiting for her at the altar was Daniel, dressed sharply, his scar still above his eyebrow, but his eyes full of joy instead of pain. Pastor Bankole himself stood to conduct the ceremony, his voice steady and proud, no longer cold or unforgiving. He walked his daughter down the aisles, his once broken leg, now only a slight limp, a quiet reminder of the day everything changed. Love, he told the congregation, looking directly at his daughter and the man who was about to become his son, does not always come wrapped the way we expect it to. Sometimes, the people we are quick to judge are exactly the people God sends to teach us the most important lessons. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I thank God I learnt it before it was too late. As the church erupted into songs and dancing, Comfort wept with joy, watching her family, once broken, finally whole again. Esther, standing proudly beside her best friend as her bridesmaid, laughed through her own happy tears, remembering all those secret afternoons that had led to this very day. And in Mile 2, the little workshop that had once burned to ashes now bore a freshly painted sign above its door. Okafor and Sons mottos, honest work, honest hearts. It was, everyone agreed, the truest sign in the whole town. Years later, people in the neighborhood still told the story to their children, how a pastor's daughter once gave up everything for love, how a bad boy turned out to have the kindest heart in town, and how a proud father learned, just in time, that forgiveness is stronger than pride, and that love, true love, always finds its way home.